I don't care what kind of business you run, one of the most challenging aspects for any of us, at least for myself, is the ability to give feedback to my team members in such a way that it affects the change I want and actually is taken the right way. Well, what if I told you there's a stepwise approach that's proven to be able to do this for you? Well, today I've got international lecturer, acclaimed author Joe Hirsch giving you a stepwise approach to being able to give the feedback you need to give for your team to thrive. So, whether you're on the treadmill, in the car, or have a notebook in hand, I think this is one that might very well change the way you run your practice. Hey there, everybody. I have an amazing treat for you today. And sometimes in life, you just sort of come across people who become friends of yours. And it's not until after you've gotten to know them a little bit that you realize how amazing of a human being they are beyond what you already knew, right? So today I've got a good friend of mine, Joe Hirsch. He is a columnist for Inc. He has been on a TEDx, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Correct.
He has, of course, written the amazing book that many of the people on Orthopreneurs have heard of called
The Feedback Fix.
The Feedback Fix, an Amazon bestseller, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and a must-read for any of you out there. It is an amazing book. But I got to know him before any of this. And
probably over some barbecue chicken.
Oh, it's good barbecue chicken. So I welcome the amazing, incomparable father of 4, husband of 1.
Last I checked.
Last time you checked. Joe Hirsch. So welcome, Joe.
Hey, Glenn. What's going on? This is going to be fun.
Yeah, it will be. Yeah. And just to let you know, this is not some guy I just grabbed off the street from down the block, though.
Well, you could have done that for all we know.
Well, in fact, that is true, that he is down the block, but it's not every day that you get the guy down the block is also a bestseller on Amazon and an international speaker, a sought-after speaker who's trained with some of the most amazing training companies out there. And I know him as one of the most progressive thinkers for one of the biggest problems that we have as orthodontists, as dentists, as small business owners, which is managing feedback with our team members. It's something that we all struggle with. If you go onto any of the Facebook groups and you start looking around at ideas that people have, if you have 10 doctors, you'll have 20 opinions about how to handle this. And so tell us a little bit about your background. Tell us a little bit about how you ended up where you are now, and we'll take it from there.
All right, Glenn. So basically, I came to this problem of how to solve feedback because I was so terrible at getting it myself.
I find it hard to believe.
And no, I really struggled with it, like so many people. And it got me thinking, this is something that we do so much of, and yet for so many people, it's a source of fear. So how do we move that from being a source of fear to a source of joy? And as I dug into some of the research and some of the best practices behind giving and receiving feedback, it became clear to me that it's not a problem with the message, it's a problem with the mindset. And when I say that, it's because too often feedback focuses on a past that people can't change instead of a future that people can. And if we get better at changing that mindset, then we can actually change the tone and trajectory of feedback and move it from something that's a source of fear to a source of joy.
And in my practice, for the record, we no longer give feedback. At all, ever. We only give feed forward.
Ah, there you go. Pick that up.
I don't know, some crazy guy wrote some book. He's a columnist for Inc.
Yeah.
We'll get into more of that in a little bit. But yeah, it's remarkable because that's one really bad source of unhappiness, if you will, in most orthodontic practices. And again, something we'll get into in a little bit is the concept of feedback, which I'll use the old term for now because that's where people are from. It's like Equenche Ocha. That is how they know you, Ace.
Yes.
But it's one of those things that really is difficult for most of us because keep in mind, because you may not be familiar with the orthodontic space, these are generally pretty smart people who made it through the crucible, if you will, the academic crucible, and they went through college and dental school and made it into these programs that are very exclusive. But the one thing they were never taught along the way was how to give feedback. Many have had to receive it, unfortunately, in many ways, from people who were not equipped to give it the way you teach people to give it. But certainly giving feedback is something most of us were never trained in. And so looking forward to hearing some of your inspirational thoughts on that. Can you give everybody out there a little bit of an idea of what were your first steps in training, right? How did you get to where you are in terms of your knowledge base?
So I come out of the education space. I've been a classroom teacher, an instructional coach. I've worked with superintendents and school principals and everyday classroom teachers, focused mainly on the art and science of education. But as part of all that, it became clear to me that feedback is a real problem for teachers especially, because we spend so much time giving it, and yet we're so bad at receiving it, especially when it comes from sources that we may not know, like, or trust. And so as I started to dig into this issue, it became clear to me that this was not really just a local problem for educators. This is a universal problem that people from all industries and all walks of life struggle with. And as I developed a thesis around not just what is, but what might be for the field of feedback, I started to realize that the trick isn't so much in what we say, but in what others hear. And that shift from focusing on a past that people can't change to a future that they can is the key to making that message more audible for people so that they can hear it and like it and ultimately act on it. So I was blogging on this topic for an education blog. The blog caught the attention of an acquisitions editor at Rowman & Littlefield, which is a publishing house. One thing led to another. 15 months after that, I published The Feedback Fix. It actually was repurposed from an education book to a more of a generalist trade publication, which means that instead of just, sitting in, let's say, principals' offices, it would sit on the shelves of Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Target, other places like that. Thankfully, it did fairly well. It's now in 2 other languages and, has made an impact on people's lives, which to me is the most important thing. Right. So based on the strength of that message, I started really diversifying that focus, and now share this with Fortune 500s, nonprofits. I do training and keynotes. I gave a TEDx on it this past year, but it's all really about the same idea, and that is, how do we change feedback from a source of fear to a source of joy? And through my writing at Inc. and other places, and through my speaking, I'm really laser focused on this one idea. How do we help people become better versions of themselves? And the trick is not to focus on who they are, but who they are becoming.
I like that.
And if we do that, and we're brave enough and bold enough to make that shift, then we can actually help them become the very best versions of themselves.
Right on. And by the way, you forgot to mention, along with TEDx, a more prestigious place is the Orthopreneurs Summit.
Bring it
That's even more prestigious.
September 2019.
Yep.
Be there, everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
If you haven't signed up yet, you want to get in on that.
I love you, Joe. But he's actually going to be one of our speakers at the Orthopreneurs Summit, so we're certainly lucky to have him there. Before we get into the actual, I want to say the heavy lifting, if you will, I remember you spent some time at a prestigious training place, right?
Yeah.
Was it Deloitte? I can't remember who you were with.
So Deloitte is one of the story frames for the Feedback Fix. I met with the chief people officer at Deloitte, who at the time was doing some very interesting work in reimagining performance management from a ratings and metrics-based system to one that's much more developmental in its focus. So focusing on goals and not just sort of rank and yank, which was the model for years. And
rank and yank,
which
I've never heard that term.
Thankfully has been retired in most corporate spaces, but rank and yank originated in the 1980s, Jack Welch GE culture of assigning numbers to your top performers, your middle performers, and your low performers. The top performers were promoted, the lowest ranking performers were fired. So it takes a very linear view of performance, a very merciless view of performance and potential, and really reduces people to numbers, which is an unfortunate way to view people, because people are always evolving and emerging, and it's our job as managers to help them become their best, not merely to rate them as they currently are, but as who they might still become. Right. And so one of the frames for the Feedback Fix was the work that Deloitte is doing, and they took me through sort of an inside view of the way they're managing their talent pipeline and how they're growing their talent. That was one. Another really interesting frame was the high performance coach for the Seattle Seahawks, Michael Gervais.
I'm reading about that.
He's a great, he's fabulous. And Gervais also takes a much more holistic view to performance, sort of like the inside game. And that's the focus in the book on how you sort of become your own inner coach and sort of focus on the signals that emanate from within you rather than just listening to the voices that come from outside you. One of the frame for sort of my education crowd was the work of the Momentous Institute. It's the most successful education reform institution in the United States. They have a high school graduation rate of 99% for a population that is well below the socioeconomic line, and they're doing incredible work there. And also a really interesting program in Israel, actually, that is taking talent and changing the way that we raise the game of even our most highest performers. So all those stories, plus the science and some really good strategies, are all in the book, but it all comes down to a simple truth, and that is that people can't change what they can't control. And if we want people to write a better future about their own performance, we need to give them more control over that future. And that's why I think that we shouldn't focus on feedback, which is rooted in the past. We need to shift the message to feed forward, which is an embrace of the future potential that everyone still has.
Yeah. And in my practice, that's what I've tried to do. My team might disagree at times, but the things you say in this book are fantastic. Now, you started a sentence where you said people, whatever. And I think the key is to start with that first word, that we're managing people, right? They're not dental assistants. They're not treatment coordinators. They are human beings. They are people. They have specific needs. Everybody's different. The old saying that everybody's special. You're special like everyone else.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, everybody has their own way of being spoken to. Everybody has their own way of taking feedback internally and accepting it or fighting with it. And I really liked a lot of the things you spoke about in the Feedback Fix. So let's dive into it a little bit. Mm-hmm. I'm a small business owner. I've got 5 or 6 team members, staff members, employees, whatever you want to call it. I've never been trained any of this. I just took out $500,000 in loans to buy a practice. I've got $300,000 at minimum of school debt below me. And I'm just dying to just make a living. I'm just trying to pay my bills. I'm struggling. And the phone is being answered and my front desk has no idea what she's doing wrong. She's scaring my customers away, if you will. Where do I start in this whole thing? Where would you tell me that sort of classic new grad, and perhaps somebody who's been doing it for quite some time, where do I go from here? Where do I start? What are some good suggestions or ideas?
First thing is to get clear on what's really important to you. Because the tendency with feedback givers is to throw everything at the other person. And it's only natural, right? We become fixers. But the problem is when we become someone else's fixer, they don't actually become takers. We're trying to fix something that they don't want or think that they need to fix. So the first step is to get clear on what's really important. And once you have clarity about what's really important, it's all about how you frame it and how you sustain it. So let's say the person at this front desk is a little bit coarse in her interactions with perspectives or even...
That's really good.
Yeah.
We hear that a great deal in orthodontic world. That woman...
Not soft.
Or man, it's not nice.
Wasn't nice enough. Yeah, it left a bad first impression.
I love you, Dr. Hirsch, but that woman at the front has been a nightmare.
And they're your gatekeepers. That's your first phase.
Right.
And your first voice. Right. So for you, it's really important that the interaction between your office and your patients is a positive experience from the get-go. Right. So you would take this person aside, let's call her Claire, and say, listen, Claire, can I give you some feedback about the way you're answering phone calls? Now, that's a different kind of question than you saying, Claire, can I give you feedback? Because immediately when we start asking that question, that triggers a threat response deep down in our brains. And not to get into the weeds on the neuroscience, but there's a real visceral reaction that we have to getting feedback. It throws us into a state of stress. It throws us into a state of defensiveness. We adopt a defensive crouch. We adopt fight or flight because it is a matter of our own survival. It's a matter of our survival and our standing, which is now threatened by that one question of, can I give you some feedback? So the first thing that you would do is really give it an address. What and where? Where is this happening? So once you tell her, I want to talk to you about this particular issue of the way you're talking to people on the phone, that at least frames the context so that she doesn't feel like you're coming at her with everything. And then you want to get into the reasons for why this is a problem for you and really for her, because ultimately you're both moving towards the same goal, which is a beautiful patient experience from the beginning. And so you say, look, the reason why I want to talk about this is because it's so important to us here at Krieger Orthodontics that this is something that we create. We create a beautiful experience, a pleasurable experience, a positive experience from the moment someone picks up the phone and calls our office, and that's you. So already you're empowering this person with a view of her role within the organization. She's not just the person answering the phones. She's creating a patient experience. And so you've now reframed the whole essence of this conversation rather than one of trial and accusation. It's one of partnership and growth because you're in this together. And then you get into the reasons why it really matters, the affect of that. So you say, look, I feel that if you're answering that, you may want to role play this with her, and she may let some things come across in that interaction where you're like, hey, look, when I heard that just now, I felt a little bit put on edge. And the reason why you say it as an I statement as opposed to a you statement is because it comes down to this universal truth. We can argue with what others say, but we cannot dismiss the way it makes them feel. And so by making I statements, I felt that this was a little bit harsh, or I feel uneasy when I hear you say that. That's valuable feedback that's rooted in an affect, in an emotion that can't be denied because it's how you feel. And oftentimes we're blind to the way we're showing up to others and how we're making others feel. And then finally, the most important part of this is the prompt that comes at the end. And that is, okay, so Claire, what do you want to do about this? What do you think we should do about this? How can we change this? Rather than offering a prescription of you should do this, which is much more hierarchical, which is much more directive, which is prescriptive in nature, you're saying to her, look, we've given this a specific address, what and where. We've given the reason why this matters. You've reframed it as something that really is about growth and goals and partnership. You've mentioned the emotions that are part of it, the affect, and then you've prompted her to ask about what she would want to do. So when you spell that out, WRAP, that's a wrap. That's so different than the praise sandwich that we give people, giving a feedback wrap, talking about what and where, the reason, the affect, and then the prompt. That's a totally new way of looking at this. And it accounts for all the brain science that goes into these conversations, the threat detection and the threat awareness that goes on in people's brains as soon as you try to offer feedback, the defensiveness and the crouch that they go into with arms raised and guard up. And you're eliminating all that because you're approaching as a partner, not an adversary. And when that happens, you are more likely to get what you want because you've given others what they really need. And what is that? Timely, specific, future-focused feedback that is still within their control to change, and it gives them say and voice over how that change is going to happen.
Nice. So a couple of questions, if I may. The conversation at the beginning. Hey, Joe, I'd like to offer you some feedback about how you're doing this podcast. No, but that's the way I would give you specific.
Yeah.
And it's a request. It's not a statement. Hey, Joe, when you have a second free, I want to.
Exactly.
Sorry.
And finding that mutual time is really important. And, I did mention this, but it kind of goes without saying, but it's important to nonetheless, put it out there. Feedback has to be a comfortable environment for people. Already, if they're uncomfortable in a place they don't want to be at a time they don't want, then already you're up against the 8 ball. What did I do to you, Glenn?
Sorry. I just had a sneeze. It was horrible.
We can take that out. Right?
I'm good. Leave it in. It's great.
Leave it in. It's good. This is Glenn After Hours, everyone.
Yeah, this is...
Put the vodka away, please.
I'm sorry.
Okay. I thought we were going to keep this dry vodka.
Should I put the ribs away too?
No, we'll keep those out. That's good. That's adding a lot.
Going back to... So let's unwind this a little bit.
Yeah.
Let me rephrase that. Is it okay with you, Joe, if we rewind this a little bit?
Yeah, it sure is.
And go back. So let's go into the typical orthodontic practice, as I've seen it, right? 27 years in dentistry. You see these sort of engrams, right? You see the way things happen. And one thing I do want to talk about real quickly before we get there is you talked about something really, really good, which is that you have this conversation, the wrap, right? From beginning until end is happening, about your planning.
Yeah.
You're discussing. And there's a great conversation I had once with Eduardo Briceno.
Great name.
Yeah, it's a great name. I'm going to change my name to that one day. I want to be known as Dr. Eduardo Briceno.
Nice.
But he's from California, part of a really, really good group that works with companies to help them understand how to perform better. And he's got a TED Talk. It's got a few million hits on it. And he talks a great deal about and I'm a big advocate of the performance zone and the practice zone, right? And the reason we often fail is we try to practice in the performance zone because we've often all been put in the performance zone all the time. And so we're not used to being in the practice zone, but it makes you better at everything. And he uses the analogy of a trapeze artist. They don't try a new trick 50 feet above the ground with no net.
Yeah.
They go a foot over a foam pit and they practice it and they practice it and they practice it.
Soft landing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then they go to the performance zone. And all too often when we give feedback, we throw them right back into the performance zone.
Yeah.
And we never practice it, right?
Yeah.
And I like the fact you said you role play.
And I think also it comes to the issue of timing. Most of the time, at least the feedback that I received when I was teaching in the classroom, was that it often would be weeks before I got official feedback from a supervisor. I would get a classroom observation. I would go days before we debriefed it and weeks before there was a formal write-up that we could discuss. And I found that to be the case in corporate settings as well, that this became quarterly or even annually. And that cadence of feedback needs to be much more in the moment and just in time. Because if we don't do that, then again, brain science tells us we're already forgetting most of what happened already within 24 hours, and certainly within a week, almost all of it's gone. When you look at the forgetting curve, memory starts to dip already. About 70% of what we learn, new information is gone within the first 24 hours, and up to 90% is gone within the first week.
My wife would say that's within the first 15 minutes.
I'd say, yeah, for men, I think the forgetting curve happens within 5 minutes. But for most other people,
90% within
90% within a week.
Wow.
70% within one day, which is why it's so important to catch these moments when they're happening and to make feedback much more of a conversation that happens regularly and is embedded within the workplace rather than something that is seasonal and higher stakes.
Right.
And making that shift from just in time, from irregular to just in time, that's really important because that ultimately delivers information in a much more accessible pace that people can actually do something with when they are still aware of what's happened. So that's the foam pit, making sure that people are aware of what's happening in the moment, and then having these conversations in a way that shows that you're an advocate for them and a trusting partner, as opposed to someone who's viewing their performance with suspicion and accusation.
So I love it. I want to hit 2 points. One is what I was mentioning about us, how it typically occurs, right? We walk past the front desk and we hear somebody answer the phone, quote unquote, the wrong way.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether they were ever trained properly. It doesn't matter if we ever took the time to actually spend a lot of time in the practice zone, which is what I do with all my new team members. But let's assume that they went through an appropriate training and you walk past the front desk and you hear, gosh darn it, will you accept this appointment or not, right? Something weird and strange.
Tuesday at 5, damn it.
Take it or leave it. You'll be here. I got another person on the line. Do you want it or not?
Yeah.
But you hear that, right? And let's say you don't quite hear that bad, but you hear something that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up a little bit, you bristle a little bit.
Yeah.
Now you're on your way to go to grab a patient. Yeah. And you're going to be away from the front desk for the next 2 to 3 hours. So what do? You got 2 to 3 hours, before you go back to that person, because my assumption is that it's very hard for us to just, you're not advocating, or I suspect you're not advocating that I hear it, I put everything else on hold, I grab that person, bring him back in the office and go, hey, Claire, do you mind if I offer you some feedback about how you're answering the phone and rush through it?
That's not good.
Right.
Because then they feel like it's gotcha instead of got ya. And that difference, gotcha,
I like that,
versus got ya.
I gotcha.
Gotcha is like,
I got your back.
I caught you, and got you is I got your back.
Yeah, I like that.
And that's huge because that is the tonal problem with so much feedback, is that we feel like we're on trial. We feel like someone is judging us. In fact, they are. And that goes back to the whole threat awareness thing, the whole threat state that we're in, the state of stress. And so if you change that dynamic from one of fear to one of support, encouragement, and even joy, then people will respond much better to your feedback because they realize that it's coming from a place of respect, trust, and good intention. And that is the key. It's changing our intent and changing our approach, the way we approach people, and also the way we approach feedback in general.
So that's my question. So again, at the end of it, so I hear it at 2:30, I'm with patients till 5 o'clock comes. Do I go up to Claire at that exact moment and say, hey, Claire, do you have a few minutes free? Because I'd really like to talk to you. But then that's a statement, right? It's not a question any longer. Mm-hmm. But do you have some, I hope you have some time free. Is it okay with you if we talk a little bit about how you're answering the phone? How do I start, for most of us who don't have that business training, who haven't been through huge HR training, where do we start that conversation? Do I just walk up to them and invite them to have this conversation? Do I schedule it for the next morning before the day starts and scare the heck out of them thinking they're going to be fired?
Exactly.
How do I approach this?
I think the best thing to do, and the thing that I've actually worked with certain companies on, is actually creating scheduled times for meeting and giving these check-ins with employees. And the check-in model basically, it could be used for anything. Could be talking about their own career goals, could be talking about developmental issues, or just using it as a time to touch base on performance issues that came up recently. And because that is a standing time within an organization, it lives in the calendar. It's not something that has to be scheduled. It's not something that has to elicit fear or raising of eyebrows. It's just something that people do. And that's what I really am pushing for here, is moving feedback into the realm of what people just do.
Right.
And these conversations. And when those conversations are, like, those blocks of space are in place, then it's much more natural to have the conversation about this particular issue. But what if you don't? What if this is like a real need that you have to just bring up and you're not ready at the point yet where you've got check-ins with your teams? So I'd approach Claire and say, at a time when things are settled and not in the moment, not when it just happened, not when you were passing by, later on in the day, be like, hey, Claire, can we touch base at the end of the day? I have something I wanted to share with you. And again, that's pretty innocuous. You're sitting down together and you say, okay, and she's of course named the time and the place. Already she feels at ease, and say, look, I want to give you some feedback about the way I heard you answer the phones today. I want to do that because I care about you. Now, adding that statement of care also really matters, because now again, it's revealed your intent. Your intent is not to accuse her or put her on the defensive or make her worry about her job security, but to say, look, I'm committed to you. I'm committed to this relationship. I'm committed to you being successful. And so I care about you, and I want to give you this feedback because I care. And then go into the wrap. What and where, reason why it matters, the affect, the emotions it caused you to feel, and then P, prompt. What are you going to do to help her see for herself what that takes? That's a real shift for most people in feedback, because most of the time we approach feedback as what I call a window gazer. A window gazer is when you have two people standing beside a window. We could be right up here in your man cave, Glenn, looking out the window, and you could be telling me what you see. Now, I could see something completely different than what you see. You could say, hey, the street's really busy right now, which for our neighborhood this time of night, not so much. But I could be like, yeah, what we talk about? It's empty. You're like, no, there's so many people out. Look at it, enjoying the night. I'm like, Glenn, what are you talking about? There's nobody out there. And that's a question of perspective. But your perspective is the one that matters, because in the relationship between orthodontist, business owner, and operator, and phone, receptionist, you have the power.
Right.
And when you have the power, you also have the perspective. And it's only your view, the view of you, the gazer, that matters.
I like that.
But if we shift to a mirror holder,
right?
When you're holding a mirror, there's still one view, but it belongs to somebody else,
right?
To that other person on the other side of that mirror. And so now it's no longer Dr. Krieger's view, it's Claire's view. You're not telling Claire what to see. You're helping Claire see it for herself.
I love it.
That's the prompt. That's feed forward. It's focusing on a future people can control. It's giving them voice and choice in that process. And it's ultimately removing the fear and finger pointing from feedback conversations and changing it to something that's much more partner-based and focused on the future, focused on not just who they are, but who they are becoming.
Nice. So I have just 3 more quick questions for you. I don't want to keep you here all night. The first is, what if that person right? You've given them the opportunity to look in the mirror, but let's say what they see in the mirror is not really what, hey, Claire, I'd really, is it okay with you if I talk to you a little bit about how you're answering the phone? Oh, sure. You set up the time, we sit down, we talk about it, you frame it. When I hear you answer the phone, I feel as if it's a bit rough, a bit what have you, and you discuss it with her and ask, no, I think I'm doing a great job. You really feel that way? I don't see that. It seems like it's going great for me. I love patients love me. I mean, they come in and tell me how wonderful I am, right? How do you, because remember, and it's really question 2, which I'll wrap into that, is that I would challenge you, and you're in corporate America a lot. I would challenge you to find a workplace where the education level of the direct reportee to reporter is got such a vast chasm. Because here you have people who've gone to grade 23 of school, right? With people who more often than not have finished grade 12.
Yeah.
And I understand that we're discussing much, much more than education. We're talking about emotional maturity.
Yes.
And there are people who have tremendous emotional maturity who never finished high school.
Right.
And there are orthodontists who have no emotional maturity. And so I think I'm sort of answering one of the questions, which is how do we relate to them and treat them like human beings?
Exactly.
But how do we deal with that person who has very low emotional intelligence, who accidentally by us was hired?
Yeah. Well, right. I think, what you're asking and the point you're bringing up is really important is what if someone's looking in that mirror, but they see a distorted view?
Right.
And so this is where it's helpful to do a few things. Part of the reason why I think people have that distortion, aside for our own blinders and lack of self-awareness, is maybe because even with your best intentions, you're still the boss and you're still creating a sense of fear and loathing on the part of the other person who feels like, hey, there's my boss man coming at me. I gotta raise my fist and get all tough and stiffen up and really fight back, because that's what happens. We fight back when we're confronted with a challenge, with an adversary. So maybe the problem is that you aren't the right messenger to give that feedback. What if there's someone else in the office who Claire sees as a true partner, who does not make decisions about her livelihood and career prospects, who can be a more trusted voice on this issue and deputize those other people to help get that message across? And so maybe you're giving a great message and your approach is a great approach, Dr. Krieger, but you're still Dr. Krieger, head of the practice, who have hired this person and can fire this person. And therefore, that creates a certain level of distrust. Inequity in the relationship. And so find those mirror holders who sit beside Claire, so to speak, who can perhaps deliver that message and be a more trusted source of information.
But can that create friction? A coworker, a lateral coworker, for instance, which is what we have mostly in orthodontics.
Yeah.
We have an office manager, many of us don't. We have the owner.
Yeah.
And the office manager is a direct report to me, so oftentimes they're viewed as a superior. And
yes.
So does it create friction in the workplace when I have another assistant who's Claire's good friend to have that? Or if delivered properly, we don't really care about the position. We care about the fact that there's good feed forward being given.
Ultimately, this comes down to culture. And the places where I've seen this become most successful is where feedback becomes a team sport. And that requires a certain level of trust on the part of everyone in that office setting, in that team. But it can happen. And ultimately, when there is that level of trust, where the culture is marked by relationships that aren't just collegial, but are collaborative, then people see one another as sources of information and ultimately can learn from everyone. And that, by the way, goes for the people at the top, that they're just as likely to receive feedback from an underling as they are from someone who is an equal. So if you had a business partner, you might be comfortable getting feedback from that individual, but not from an office manager or from one of your frontline care providers. But in this kind of an environment where everyone is looking out for each other's best interests and where it's truly a supportive environment, and how to create that might be our part two, Glenn, that's a very tough thing to achieve, but when it's there, it actually greases the wheel for feedback to be most effective.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. So before I let you go, I've got my 10 quick questions I'm going to ask you at the end of this.
Right.
You've been warned. I've told you. So I just want to let everybody know, I'm going to offer feed forward right now.
Let's do it.
Joe, if it's okay with you, I'd love to talk to you about the shirt you're wearing.
All right. Thanks. Yeah, I would love to actually. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, I'm a Giants fan and he's an Eagles fan. And so I'm gonna tell you how it makes me feel later on.
I can't tell you it was accidental.
Yeah, I know, always. So these are the 10 questions that James Lipton used to ask on Inside the Actor Studio, one of the greatest interviewers on earth. And he took these from Bernard Pivot's show as well. So here we go. You ready?
Let's do it.
I'm not going to say a word other than what you have to say. You ready? Here we go. What is your favorite word?
Potential.
Oof. What is your least favorite word?
Dynamic.
Really?
I hate that word.
Dynamic.
Let's purge it from the English language, please.
Dynamic.
Dynamic.
But I thought you were such a dynamic speaker.
Then I suck. That's code for scant.
But it had such potential. What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Seeing people who rise to challenges and struggle to achieve their very best.
Nice. And what turns you off?
People who think they're much bigger than they really are.
What is your favorite curse word?
Malarkey.
It sounds like something out of Philadelphia.
That's right.
So what sound or noise do you love?
Stillness.
What sound or noise do you hate?
New York City cab drivers.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Juggling.
Ooh, profession.
Yeah.
You want to hear profession?
I think it's a real thing. Why? I mean, this is a pretty good career path.
It's okay.
I mean, there's always going to be carnivals and birthday parties, right?
Right on.
There's a pretty good adjustable market for drivers, I feel like.
What profession would you not like to do?
Orthodontia.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
I don't know that I have what it takes to do it.
I think with a little training, I think you can get.
I don't know. I believe in the potential of people, but I think there's a certain level of talent and expertise which I don't have. Maybe the dexterity. I mean, I probably would end up just breaking teeth.
You got to work hard. But then again, most orthodontists are pretty dynamic.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So this is one, knowing you personally, I can't wait to hear the answer to. It's my last question. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
You worked to the best of your potential and you made a difference.
Right on. I want to thank Joe Hirsch for being a part of this episode with us today.
Thank you, Dr. Glenn.
My pleasure. Before I let you go, I've mentioned you're already going to be at the Orthopreneur Summit in September, giving a 45-minute talk that's going to be germane to what we do on a daily basis. Are you consulting yet? Are you going into practices to work with people on HR?
Yes, definitely active in the HR space. I have not actually consulted any orthodontists yet, aside from you.
And we haven't done it yet yet.
Yeah, we're on the way.
I'm going to get you there.
We're on the way. My main practice areas where I've had an impact is in the HR space, in the marketing space, and sales and leadership team. So that's where I'm most active. If people want to find me, they can go to www.joehirsch.me. They can find my columns.
.me.
Me, yeah. Some guy took joehirsch.com, but I'm pretty sure I have better web traffic than he does. And
I bet his name is Joe Hirsch.
He's not selling it for cheap, I'll tell you that much. You can find me at Inc. And my TEDx talk lives at TEDx.com.
Great talk, by the way.
Thank you.
I love the way you opened up that talk.
Thank you.
That was amazing. And again, not just because he's a friend, but because it's an absolutely amazing book that every one of us should be reading for our practice. Every business owner should be reading The Feedback Fix. Amazing book. Go out, read it, enjoy it. He's an amazing guy, amazing writer. And thank you again